Thank you all for joining us for the Regenerate Your Reality webcast series. This is our 8th episode, and it's all about permaculture design. We're so happy to have you here and have Scott Gallant with us that can tell us some insight. He has so much experience in design and has his own company that helps design farms and live regeneratively. Thank you all for being here. I want to just show you a little bit about our farm and how we designed our life. Permaculture design can be part of how we design our life, how we design our lands, and how we live in harmony with nature. Just emitting a few other people, and here we go. I'm going to share my screen with you. So this is our backyard, and we first started with drawing up a little bit of what we envisioned. So this drawing down here was what all the fruits we wanted to grow, and all of the different designs we wanted to create around our homestead and our house. You can visit us with farm tours or farm to table lunches. We also do consulting as well. But just starting with being clear with your vision and then creating it to become your reality. And Regenerate Your Reality is a book. It's a best-selling book. It's a farm, and it's touring with us wherever we go. And so this is our backyard. You can see from a bird's eye view this designing in kind of in a circular space here. And we looked at the topography, the soil, the temperature, all of these patterns in order to really understand what our farm and how to design it from paper to reality to planting. So with that, I would love to pass it over to Scott and have him introduce himself, and then we can do question and answer at the end of this webcast. Feel free to introduce yourself as well. And thanks so much, Scott. I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jean. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Look forward to seeing the questions. I like questions. It makes this more fun for me. So please throw plenty of questions out there. And yeah, just to introduce myself to start, I'm from the United States, a little town in Ohio. Kind of grew up in the countryside, kind of corn, soy land. Did not grow up anything around permaculture, any alternative world. It was very much a kind of classic Midwest United States background. And I got a degree in economics. I was on a track to go on a very conventional life, basically to go and work in finance. And a couple of things never quite clicked for me in that whole path. And I was fortunate enough to not ever enter into that path. And so after university, I went out west in the United States and got a job working for basically a company that builds trails in national parks, like a conservation corps. And it was this moment that was really important for me of really reconnecting with nature. It was something that as a kid, I grew up outside and building forts and catching snakes and playing with turtles, and kind of lost that in middle school, high school, college, parties and drinking and concerts and all these things that happen. And being out west really rekindled this love for I just want to be outside. And it was physical work. It was manual labor. We were carrying shovels and picks and saws, and we were building things and using our bodies. And I was reminded of how much I loved using my body. And made the decision to not go and take a corporate job. I had an offer at the time that was quite a good offer. I'll probably never make doing what I do now as much as that singular post-college offer. And I have no regrets about that at all. And basically, I found myself at a crossroads where I had a choice to take this corporate job or go and travel. And I had met a woman who became, we're not partners anymore, but we were partners for 9 years. And we decided to go hitchhiking through Mexico. And so we like crossed the US Mexico border. Pretty adventurous. There's lots of stories in there. That's probably a different podcast. And we ended up making our way to Costa Rica after about a year hitchhiking through Mexico and Guatemala and Nicaragua, and ended up at a project that's pretty well known here in Costa Rica called Rancho Mastatal. There kind of dove into growing food, into natural building, and really continued this trend of like being outside, working with my body, and eventually started putting seeds in the ground. And that was kind of my first deep dive into growing food and understanding what that meant. I always heard about this word permaculture, and I kind of kept it off to the side. I didn't really know what it was. It felt a little hippie for me, even though I'm a hippie. My hair is actually quite long if I let it down. But I kept it to the side. I got more into what we might call agroforestry or agroecology here in the tropics, really exploring those topics. But eventually I was approached by my mentor about teaching a permaculture design course with him, and made the decision to do that and sat in on the class to really start studying it. What does this idea mean? And there was some really key aha moments in that kind of classic 2-week PDC permaculture design course. And one of the big takeaways that for me, which I think we'll really talk about today, was the idea of using design as a tool. And so we have this word permaculture, which is kind of this vague word. It's a bit hard to define. Even after years of teaching, I don't attempt to come up with some all-encompassing definition. But we really have the second word after it, and that's design, permaculture design. We like to think of those two things linked together. And that is really when we put permaculture into practice, we're usually, though not always, putting design into practice. And so that's what I do professionally now. I have a small design firm that was started 4 years ago, pretty much exactly 4 years ago. It's called Porvenir Design. There's now 4 of us in the design firm. I think Jean's just put a link up. You guys can see a little bit more about what we do. And we practice permaculture design. So we have clients all around Costa Rica. So I continue to be based here in Costa Rica. Pre-pandemic, we were working in other parts of Latin America, Puerto Rico, Colombia, Nicaragua, but I've really just kind of focused here. And we work at all different scales. We work with developers, we'll work with homesteaders, a lot of tourism entities. This being Costa Rica, tourism kind of links into almost everything here. And yeah, what we're doing is trying to take permaculture ideas, the principles and ethics that you guys are maybe familiar with, hopefully a little bit, and putting those into practice and using design as our tool for that. And I can keep talking, but Jean, I don't know if you want to direct the conversation or bring any questions in. Let me know what you prefer.
Yeah, maybe. I love hearing about your background, and I have a kind of similar story. I went into finance actually for 8 years, and then became financially free, and then came here to Costa Rica 5 years ago. But I think it would be amazing if maybe talking about permaculture design in on a macro and micro level of how we can apply it in our lives.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, congratulations first on escaping the financial realm. I got just lucky enough. I really didn't get into it. And here I am today. Yeah. So permaculture design, it's really this activity of not exclusively looking at the land, but often with a mentality toward the land. And I think that's something to emphasize when we talk about permaculture. Oftentimes we'll say permaculture isn't gardening, it's how you design your garden. And I think that's a key difference. So it's not necessarily something that you do, it's something that you use. It's a tool. And it's a tool that can be applied at all different scales, from the seed to the solar system. I have friends that apply permaculture design to how they organize the apps on their phone. And that speaks to a particular component of design, which is about efficiency. And so although not everything we're trying to do is trying to be efficient, the modern world and most of our modern systems are very focused on efficiency. We're often trying to find a balance between efficiency and resiliency. Those two things hold a point of tension. But in the phone, for example, where we place specific apps, and we might want to hide apps that we're addicted to, like the Instagram, like tuck that away in the other screen or in all these little boxes, make it hard for you to get to. And maybe the apps that are most important you put in the front screen, like, kind of a silly thing, but a good example of how we might use design to do something to improve the efficiency of our life, perhaps the quality of our life, which is really what we're striving for in the end on a non-land-based entity, right? And so with permaculture, the assumption is that we have a land component here. And there's reasons for that. And a lot of us, I think, that have entered into permaculture design, we're interested in interacting with the land and getting our hands in the soil. And of course, not everyone has that ability, or it happens at different scales. And so we also find that we can apply permaculture design to, urban spaces, to small balconies. And we can also apply it to 10,000 hectare farms. And so in our work, for example, like the little homestead that I'm stewarding right now, it is 800 square meters. And that's pretty much like your minimum size lot here in Costa Rica. So it's very tiny. And the process of designing for that versus designing for maybe like a 300 hectare project that's an eco village with lots and a retreat center, which everyone is doing here in Costa Rica. There's a lot of those. They keep populating. The process is different, but a lot of the patterns and principles apply. And I think this is one of the most interesting things about permaculture. And for those of you who aren't here in the tropics that are elsewhere, I think this is something to take note of. One of the things that I find most powerful about permaculture design is that wherever you go, so whatever your context ends up being, urban, rural, suburban, temperate, arid, humid tropics, the principles, the patterns, they're going to apply no matter what you're doing. And then the specific techniques that you select, the strategies, the plants, so how you're going to actually make your garden bed, what materials you might choose in your house, what plants you're going to select, if you're going to capture rainwater, dig a well, all those things are going to be so specific to where you live. But the pattern of capturing water, the pattern of using local materials to build, all of those things just repeat wherever you are. And I think that's one of the things that's so strong about permaculture design. It really feels like this useful tool for anybody in whatever context they're working in.
Nice. Yes. Do you want to go a little bit into different patterns to design for or to work around?
Yeah. What do you mean exactly? Can you maybe give me a specific example?
Like topography, soil,
okay.
Temperature, rain,
yeah,
limits, biodiversity.
Yeah. So we have a really useful tool in permaculture design that's called the scale of permanence. And it didn't originate in permaculture, but it's a decision-making framework for how to approach land. And what often happens for most of us that don't come from, working on the land, maybe we didn't grow up on a farm, our grandparents didn't teach us how to read the topography or to understand, why there's conifers on the north-facing slope and the maples are, down by the valley. When we walk on a piece of land for the first time, it can be a really intimidating thing. We have this idea, we want to live like, I want to have a hearth. I want to have a bookcase full of books. I want to have a window that gets morning sun and a garden that gives me food year round. We have these desires. We might be able to qualify them. And to actually get to that place is really intimidating if we haven't been bequeathed those skills in so many different ways that can happen. And it really doesn't happen very much anymore, right? And so one of the tools we use for overcoming that is called the scale of permanence. And it's a way to walk on the land the first time, where at the very beginning, we're looking at the things that are most broad and that are the most difficult for us to change. And so when we walk on a piece of land, we always are looking at the climate first. It's really hard to change your climate. And so, what is this climate? We're looking outside of our land boundaries. So, what does rainfall look like year round? What's the longest distance or longest amount of time between rain? And so we get caught often, if we look at basic rain numbers, we'll look at averages, for example. It's like, okay, on average, we get, where I live here, maybe we get 40 centimeters per month. Average, though, isn't that interesting, because some months we might get 120 centimeters and some months we might get 0. And so our design actually wants to play with those extremes. So we start with climate, which here in the tropics, rain is our main factor. We don't have winter. We don't have to think about snow. We don't have to think about frost. Those in the temperate climates, it's a little bit trickier in that regard. And then after climate, we look at topography, geology, the geography of our place. Again, it's really hard to change the slope that we're on, which direction it faces in relation to the sun. If we are high on the slope or low on the slope, all of these things are going to affect how wind, how water, how sunlight, how noise, how pollution, how heat and cold move through our site. And they're things we can't really control. So when we're starting with design work, we step out. We often say we're zooming out, and we start with looking at patterns. What are these big patterns around us? Climatological patterns, topographic patterns that we can't control, that are usually bigger than our site. And let's understand those. Let's do our research. Like, we want to know if there's a fire season. We want to know about seasonal winds. We want to know how far down the water table is. And there's lots of ways to go about getting that information. This is what we would call like a site analysis. This is going to be everything from just good old fashioned research. And we have the internet at our fingertips, for better or worse now. This is going to be talking to the old timers that, have been on that land, or your neighbors that have been there their whole lives, etc. So we gather that information, and then after that, we continue working down the scale of permanence, and we start moving into things that become easier and easier to change. And these are things that also might last a long time in the landscape. So we start often with trees. The trees can last a really long time in the landscape. And if you have big trees on your site, you can change those, you can cut them down, but it requires a lot of energy, usually fossil fuel energy, through the use of like a chainsaw, for example, to move it with heavy machinery. Roads are something that are both expensive from the energy perspective to make. And once you have a road in place, it's hard to change. Water. So now we look at our specific water sources. And again, this is a harder thing to change. If you don't have a spring on your property or an existing well, it often requires a lot of energy to bring water into your site. But you can bring water into your site. Almost everyone does that that's living anywhere in the world, right? And we keep moving down this list, and we go into infrastructure. And at the very bottom of the list, we find ourselves with soils, actually. Soils are something that we can degrade really quickly, and we can also build up really fast through all sorts of different methods. And so this scale of permanence, a great metaphor I've heard with it is, if we look at the top of it, the climate and the geography, that's if we're playing a board game, that's like your rules and the board. So if you're playing Monopoly, you can't really change the rules. I mean, you can, but then you're not really playing Monopoly. You can't change the board. It's there in front of you. And then everything else are the pieces in the actual play, and you making decisions about if you're going to move things around, where you're going to place them. So this is our main tool when we are gathering information, trying to look at a site, make sure we didn't miss anything, especially anything really important. And we build this into a whole collection of information, and we use that as our starting point. And that's kind of one big piece of design it's a really subjective piece. And then we get into this objective piece. So design as a word is an interesting word. It's another word that's hard to define, like permaculture. We think about like what does the word design actually mean if we were to write a definition down. In permaculture, what we're talking about is trying to assemble all these conceptual ideas and form relationships between them. And we can think of the act of permaculture design as forming relationships between all these different things we might want on a physical piece of land. And we start by being really objective. So just analyzing what exists, the history of our place, how was it managed 500 years ago, 100 years ago, 10 years ago, et cetera. And we balance that with the subjective, which is what do we want to do on here? Like what are our hopes and dreams? And so that becomes a really anthropocentric, the human side. And we have all sorts of tools that some that are more common in permaculture design. There's infinite tools out there, I think, to highlight your vision and mission, to understand what elements you want on a piece of land, like physical elements. Like I want a basketball court, I want a hot tub. I want 5 dogs. And so we use a tool called holistic decision making or holistic management. And that's a tool that is pretty common in permaculture design as well. And it's basically going out to understand the quality of life that you want and what you need to do to accomplish that. And so we'll work through clients with all the stakeholders involved to create a shared holistic context. This is like, what are you trying to do on this piece of land? And then we bring those two things together. And that's really the act of design, is like forming a relationship between the possibilities and constraints of the land and the possibilities and constraints of the human component. And the act of design, again, it's this hand that balances like the intuitive piece and the rational piece. It's the balancing the land and the client. It's balancing, actual act of design it's a verbal thing. We're communicating, and it's a visual thing. We're often sketching ideas out, presenting these reiterative feedback processes. And we kind of work through this whole process and end up hopefully with something on a piece of paper or a computer screen or sketched in the sand. This might be a crayon drawing, like a 5-year-old might be able to do this. And the hope is that by going through this process, which is a lot of work, is we do a few things. 1, we make mistakes on paper first. 2, we slow down, because we're almost always moving too fast. Almost always. And 3, I think it gives us the confidence to move forward as well and make good decisions. And we're really trying to, in our case, as a professional design firm, kind of funnel clients into making good, simple decisions. And that's kind of our professional process and how we approach design a little bit from like a philosophical perspective. And it's a funny word. We use it easily. And when we actually think about it in practice, it might not be as clear as we would expect.
Beautiful. I want to show just a few slides of how we thought about our design. This is our backyard, and similar to Scott, we really sat on the land for a period of time, just recognizing what were the patterns. Where is the forest? Where is the noise pollution from the road? And we really recommend preserving the forest, your existing forest that's on the land. We have a natural river that goes through our land in a forest. So looking at how we can work with nature, conserve, and then by designing our food forest and our food production systems to really mimic the forest and just kind of extend the natural forest within our food forest to bring back more life and animals and butterflies and birds. and biodiversity to our lands. So when we look at somebody's land, we look at what is already existing there, and also for those that are looking at stewarding land or buying land, really looking at land that's already degraded, that's already that needs regeneration. I see so many times that persons buying land that is already a jungle, and we do not want to repeat the patterns of colonialization and destruction of many humans on this earth. We want to regenerate and find lands that need that support and partnership, and then work with nature. So yeah, I loved everything you said.
Yeah, I think one of the most important imperatives of permaculture design is how do we create as much wild space as possible. We use this concept in permaculture you might be familiar with called zonation. If you are, we would say one of our first prerogatives on a design is creating as much zone 5 as possible. How do we create as much forest? And we're interested in using our human spaces, existing human spaces all over the world, as intensively as possible. And so our design work is kind of the opposite of fragmentation. We're really trying to build everything together and create complex systems. You know, we're trying to bring animals, plants together, community together. We're mixing business and livelihood at the same time. We're asking that the place that in the past maybe you segregated where you work and where you play and where you get exercise and where you eat, where you celebrate, and in our modern world, those places are often different. You might drive between them. Can we bring those together in the same place and be more intensive and really impact less land? Like on a really the most like simplest way to say that, like how do we reduce our impact? Well, let's remove humans from as much land as we can and let it recover, and take the land that we have that we're already working in, which is mostly degraded, and focus our energy there. And so I think your design really hints at that, or more than hints at it, it makes it very clear that was the focus of you guys. And I think it's a piece that when we see a property for the first time and we're trying to break it up and understand the topography, it's like, cool, where do we put forest? Where is there more forest? Where are we putting more forest? Where are we leaving it? Maybe not putting, maybe we're just walking away. Better fences, keep the cows out.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. Our neighbors 15 years ago bought 35 hectares and only chose to work with 2 of the hectares. They built on one part, and then they just left the remaining degraded grassland. And it's so beautiful to see how fast nature just recuperates without any human interaction. And that's another aspect, like Scott was saying, just letting some land to just naturally regenerate, letting land that's already existing forest, don't touch it, just allow it to be part of your preservation and conservation. And that, by having forest on your land, that's helping the mycelium within your land and within the forest connect, and creating relations from our land to the forests.
Yeah, I think it hints at, we need these larger kind of landscape planning models, because we can all do this on small pieces of land. I think most people getting into permaculture design, homesteading, we're probably not the people buying huge tracts of land in general. And what we need is to be able to zoom out and connect all of these kind of segregated, disparate properties. We should be able to look at a mountainside, a bioregion, a watershed, and understand, and we can pretty clearly, like this part, the top of the slope, the top of the watershed needs to have forest on it. The riparian zones need to have forest. And the more we can do that on our small scale, the micro scale on our own little piece of land makes a ton of sense. And then trying to figure out how zooming out, coming outside of your property boundaries and looking to make connections with whatever existing, we keep coming to forests. We're here in Costa Rica. So our go-to ecosystem for imitating for recovery is the tropical rainforest. If you're in other parts of the world, it might be different. It might be more of a savanna ecosystem, a wetland ecosystem. And then I also think it's important to understand, depending on your climate, the land might not recover without human intervention. And I think that's an interesting idea in Costa Rica because we generally have so much humidity. The land will come back on its own. The forest will come back. But if you're in a very brittle climate, a really arid climate, and it's been really degraded, it might require more human intervention. And we see that in some of the larger scale projects in permaculture where, you're going into big watersheds and you're moving soil around and you're really planting trees. And those climates, they've crossed some line, some limit where to start that recovery, get that flywheel going again, it is going to require more human intervention. We're fortunate enough to live in a place where we can really step away and trust that recovery is going to happen. It happens almost ridiculously fast here. Like if you leave your garden for a few months, it's full of guarumos and cedros, and you're just like, okay, I need a better plan here.
Yes. I want to show you how I love that Annika says the active design is the idea of intentional and purpose. I love that because it's studying your land, it's studying what needs do you have in your life. And this is how when we look at, we're stewarding 2.5 acres or 1 hectare. And we thought of, okay, here's our house. Zone 1 for us has all of our salads, all our veggies, all our herbs. And how can that be so close to the house that there's no excuse not to utilize these plants? And our zone 2 is our food forest, and that is still, we're walking that every day, and we're able to observe from even our house deck our food forests. And then our zone 3 has a fence around it, and to keep out some of the little watuses and animals. And we have most of our yucca production there, our malanga, our roots, so that some of the animals don't eat that. And then obviously we plant enough for the animals to eat as well.
Yeah, the idea of zonation, right? And it's a simple concept, like these things that need more attention should be closer to where we live. And as I forget the guest's name, but design is this intentional thing. And this sounds common sense. Like, the things that need more attention should be closer to where you live. And yet we don't do this. Like, how many people listening have seen compost systems that just get abandoned because they're just a little bit too far away from the kitchen? Because we're pretty lazy. Like, I'm quite lazy. I really would prefer to be in a hammock with my book most of the time. It's true. And so we're trying to make our life easier. We're trying to reduce the number of steps required to harvest the arugula, to take out the compost, to collect the eggs from the chickens. And Gene and Alan's design, fits that perfectly. They thought about, all right, what are the things that we have to visit every day, whether to harvest, to give attention to provide fertility to, pest control, and how do we get them close by? And a lot of that comes back to our main principle of permaculture, which is observation. So everything we're doing begins in observation. So if these things need more attention, they should be closer so that we can observe them more. The other piece of the design that I think is really interesting is creating that edge between your managed space and the wild space, and recognizing that as you create more wild space, it also brings in more wild animals that want to eat the things you're planting. And so for those of you not in the tropics, well, I know there's temperate pests for sure. Deer can be really bad. Like I'm from Ohio. My dad has given up on gardening because of the deer. Um, but here in the tropics, we have just a relentless supply of things that want to eat everything we're growing. It never stops. You don't get the winter that slows it down. So a lot of our design work is managing that, whether we're creating physical barrier like they did here to keep out the guatusas, or planting things that we know things don't like, planting enough food for the wild animals further away. There's all sorts of design strategies we have for this. And it's an ongoing cause of small to large amounts of stress for myself and all the people we work with. Yeah, everything likes to eat the things that we want to eat too.
Yes, plant enough for the animals, the neighbors that are passing by, and ourselves. So that's always an important aspect of permaculture design. We see a question in the chat about what can we do in wet ecosystems like Vancouver. So I think we can, the way to design in the tropics is the same as anywhere else in the world. We, like Scott said, starts with observation. And if my parents, we started a little permaculture garden at their house, and we started with just a few raised beds really near the house for the summertime. And you can kind of create a hugelkultur kind of bed where you start with the stumps on the bottom, and then the sticks and all the decomposing matter that takes the longest you put at the bottom, and kind of create that raised bed so that you're building up the soil and for growing space. That would be my number one recommendation, is just start small and with just your first bed nearest to your house that you can put some herbs and medicinal plants and potentially tomatoes. And also I have friends up north growing potatoes in buckets too. Anything else you want to add on that, Scott?
I think wherever you are in the world, you're going to find people that have been doing this for 30, 40 years. And so like Vancouver has a thriving permaculture community. And all of the islands off of the coast of Washington State are full of permaculture farms. There's one that jumps out in my mind that's called the Bullock Brothers Homestead. And they do courses and tours. There's an amazing book that it's specific to the Pacific Northwest, more or less, called Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway. And we can get these links, and I don't know how those things are shared, but Gene's good at that. And I think basically it's like find mentorship, find people doing this. They're out there. I guarantee it, wherever you are. And it might just take one walk around somebody else's garden for you to realize the possibilities, like all the different things you can do, no matter how far north or south in latitude you are, how short your growing season is. People will routinely surprise you at their creativity. Yeah. So find mentorship and find people working in that area already.
There's also meetup groups. I remember when I was living in Seattle, there was a Seattle Food Forest meetup group that we would just meet at the Food Forest monthly and work on the garden, and there would be workshops. So just looking into who else is interested in this topic in your area and starting to meet up with like-minded people.
Yeah, whenever I go home, I try to connect with like the Cincinnati Permaculture Guild, and they just have a little Facebook page, and there's a couple people I've gotten to know, and just try to do a little tour of the garden, see what's up, and stay connected to that space, and that helps me keep my temperate roots a little bit alive.
Yeah, and you don't really, even if you don't have land, that doesn't mean you can't get started. I've seen so many beautiful potted gardens in cities where you can grow You can put pots out in the winter time, or put the pots in your house in the winter time, and put the pots outside of your house in the summertime. But even just getting started with a pot or two of starting with one or two medicinal plants such as rosemary. Everyone should have aloe vera. Just starting with a handful of medicinal herbs that you can work with.
Yeah, I think finding something that motivates you, like if you take a permaculture design course, for example, which you don't have to do by any stretch, what I think you'll realize is that are there's 1,000 topics you could devote your whole life to. You could just be a soap maker, you could become an herbalist, you could learn how to do fine woodworking, you could learn how to manage a coppice grove of willows, and that's like, no, I'm the willow person in my community. I make the best basket you've ever seen, and that could be your whole life, and that might be a beautiful thing, and we can romanticize that a little bit. And I think when you're starting, it's really helpful to find something that gets you excited. And food and medicine is almost the easiest thing, because we eat all the time, and we do get sick, and we are interested in we talk about in permaculture shifting from consumption to production. Like, how do we move from being passive consumers into active producers? And that means taking personal responsibility for our water, our food, our medicine, our communication, our relationships, etc. And yeah, starting with a couple medicinal plants, starting with just like, cool, I'm going to grow my salad. Like, great, I'm going to try some sweet potatoes, pick something easy. Here in Costa Rica, what happens all the time is people move here and they want to grow big, juicy tomatoes and eggplants and cucumbers. And you can do that here. It helps if you're at a higher elevation, but all the immigrants moving here are usually heading toward the coast, and it's hard to grow those things. Everything wants to eat it. And so we're really almost always shifting the mindset, like, hey, why don't you focus on ginger first, and malanga and sweet potato and yucca, and these things that are easier to grow here. And from a design perspective, that's a lot of our work. We spend a lot of time trying to, put the right projects in front of people so that they're going to get those successes. Because it's really easy to just butt your head against the wall and keep trying to do something that isn't really working, and struggle and struggle and struggle. And then you give up, like, this isn't for me. I'm just going to go surf, I guess. And maybe that's fine. And we'll have to pass through those phases. But in our professional work, we're really trying to guide people to have early successes, and that builds that motivation, and that hits at another permaculture principle, which is obtain a yield. And so we have to get that yield early on. Otherwise, it might not be as fun out there in the field, sweating in the sun and getting soaked in the rain, if we don't actually get to fill my belly.
Yes. It's when we thought about designing our land, we thought about how can we maximize every space, and you can utilize the fence lines for growing upwards, like cucumbers or butterfly pea or passion fruit. And we also thought about multi-layering. So we've had different episodes on agroforestry, and you can check those out, or check out our websites about that. But looking at our food production systems, almost like mimicking the forest. We see the canopy trees, we have the middle lower trees, the shrubs, and the ground cover. And all of this can be different foods and medicines. In our first year of production, we produced turmeric, ginger, malanga, yucca, taro. We're in our second year, we're producing all of our own pineapples, papayas. Papayas grow very fast here. And if you're up north, then you can grow you'll have the summer growing season. And your orchards will grow a little bit slower than in the tropics. But just thinking about how to maximize every space on your land. Also, peanuts are a great ground cover that we've already yielded many crops and continue to spread the seeds. So thinking about what do you eat and
Mhm.
what are your favorite fruits, and that's really important to know where you want to be located because the elevation really does matter on where what I guess what elevation. For example, we can't grow durian over 800 meters. So if you want to grow like your tropical fruits, you have to be lower than 800 meters. You can't be too high. But like Scott said, if you want to grow like your onions and your broccoli and your carrots or your cabbage, you have to be above 800 meters. So it really depends on what is your diet, what's your preferences, what do you need, what are your family's needs, what is your community's needs, and kind of working in all of that to your design and making your first choice based on what are your basic needs.
Yeah, it's really like reverse engineering the life you want. And you know, we do an analysis with clients we call basic pantry analysis, and often we'll work with kitchens and hotels where we break down everything that they use in the kitchen and look at, okay, what can we source locally, what can you grow here, what are you going to import, and where do you make decisions and where do you cut things. And I also find it very interesting where this happens a lot in our work, where people will say that they are trying to find a land because they want to grow their own food, they want to have great water, but they end up buying land because of the view to the ocean.
I see.
And and that happens a lot. And now they're on top of a hill and it's really degraded soil and the access is really bad. You're working against gravity every day just to go up that hill. And I find it interesting because, you know, people will say one thing like, I want water security, I want food security, but their actual decision that they make around a property is more based on view, leisure, proximity to the ocean, which is fine. That's great. And that point of tension is really interesting. And being brought in afterwards to try to help them design for that is always a struggle. And sometimes I wish people would understand that difference before property selection and yeah, understand the possibilities at each place. And I think there was a note on elevation in the question. So basically, like in the tropics, elevation determines our species selection. If you're in the temperate climate, like in the United States, we have USDA hardiness zones. And so that is a measure of the last average frost date. And so frost determines our plant selection. Amongst other things, in temperate climates, we get things like vernalization hours. So the plants need to be cold for a certain amount of time to produce flower buds. They need the day length to change to start flowering. Here, those things aren't really big deals for us because our day length doesn't change very much. But elevation, that's where we get to decide what we're going to grow, what's going to be easy to grow, and hence what we're going to eat or what we'll buy.
Yep, exactly. I want to open it up to any questions. You can turn yourself off mute and ask a question, or in the chat, feel free to. Love to hear from you. And with that, I want to also share with you, we're doing a retreat here in July 14th through the 18th, where we'll tour our farm and learn about permaculture, soil building, food medicine, fermentation, and really living a regenerative lifestyle through permaculture and seeing what is possible. And it'll be really fun. We'll have plant-based foods and enough restoration time, but a lot of workshops as well, walking through the garden, soil building, and learning what is possible through what we're doing. So I invite you all to that. What's going on? It's hard to keep track of all of what's going on because
Yeah.
we're constantly getting involved with collaborations and fun workshops and projects. Um, but I'll put the link in the chat. And our next webinar is all about food production systems. So we'll take a deeper dive on some of the topics we talked about today and looking at all the different types of food production systems. So stay tuned for that. Sign up for it. It's June 22nd, and Alan will be teaching that. And then at the end of this month in the Tinamaste area, we're having a seed exchange that's free, and we invite you all to. We'll swap cuttings and seeds. We have a few local farmers, such as Jesus, which I don't know if you know him, but he's one of the grandfathers of organic agriculture in the Tinamaste area, and he'll be there sharing seeds in a workshop. And it's just so beautiful to see you all here. It gives us so much hope because we are agents of change, and it all starts with us, and then it ripples outward. And if we can make small changes step by step in our lives to design our lives in harmony with nature and utilize some of the permaculture concepts, designs in our own lives so that we can thrive. We're meant to thrive, and permaculture gives us the guidelines of how to work with nature, how to really thrive in our environment. Scott, do you want to say? I'm seeing a few questions come through. Do you want to say more notes on anything?
Yeah, so there was somebody asking about Central Pacific, Costa Rica. There is a Central Pacific permaculture WhatsApp group. Don't believe it's super active, but it does exist. And for specific sources of seeds and plants, I think you'd have to be more specific in like what exactly you're looking for. And we have on our website, it might have been our last blog post, that we did a big free sourcing guide. So it's basically everywhere we source things here in Costa Rica. The best seed source in Costa Rica, the only heirloom seed company, is Semillas Plantai, and they are producing, there's 3 different farms that produce organic and heirloom seeds, and they send packs from their website all around the country through the postal service. So if you're looking for vegetable seeds, they're the best source by far. Yeah. And then I think there was another question. Let me see. Still figuring out how this works. I'm on my phone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, just really swapping seeds with your neighbors too. In the Tinamaste area, there's a Telegram group that's like for fruit and plant lovers, and we just post what we are looking for and kind of trade within that group at the Tinamaste market. But going to your farmer's market is really a key to living a permaculture lifestyle, because the people at the farmer's market are like-minded. They're looking for organic. They are sometimes growing their own food. So finding your local market, your local farmers, get your local farmers contacts and start ordering from them directly. And then there's permaculture groups there's a few on Telegram. There's a few on Facebook. There's a sustainable life. There's so many groups on Facebook that you can get involved in. Let's see. I'm looking at all the questions here. And do you know any groups that are led by Ticos for permaculture?
I mean, the permaculture Costa Rica WhatsApp group is all in Spanish. And then there's the Red Permanesca, the Costa Rica permaculture community. And they have a a Facebook group, and then probably the most active is the Huertas Urbanas, which is run by Santiago Miranda, and that's a really active Facebook group that's based in. So Huertas Urbanas is like urban gardening. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Yeah. Any other questions? You can turn yourself off mute or ask them in the chat.
Here's one in the chat. Is the permaculture design project delivery, does that include specific plant species to plant by zone, teaching of clients to take care of plants, etc.? I can answer that. Yeah, so the deliverables that we make are really specific to each project. We will make what's often called a concept working plan. And so that's like a complete booklet, a number of maps. It starts with the site analysis. It starts with creating the holistic context for the client, and then we call it a concept working plan because it's the start of a work. It's a starting piece. It's not a fixed thing by any stretch, and that almost always includes a pretty detailed species list, where to cite those species, not on a very detailed level. It's not like a landscape design where we're saying, yeah, you should put the jackfruit here or the chestnut exactly here on a map. It is a broad list broken down by zones. Often includes what we call an intuitive budget. It includes infrastructure lists. It includes recommendations for hiring, sourcing, all sorts of things like that. It's usually a 15 to 30 page document. Those are most often done for larger projects, although we do them for individual homesteads as well. And everything changes based on the client's needs, but a lot of our deliverables go down that route.
Yes. And similarly, if you do any consulting with us, we start with looking at your land and coming up with kind of a dream, co-creating a dream together, and coming up with a plant list, where to sort it, where to source it from. And to answer your question, if there's any permaculture projects led by Ticos, Integral Roots is in our area. It's a newer permaculture design company that it's actually on our road, and it's led by one Tico, and it's really exciting that this is in our neighborhood. We're looking to partner actually with them on a few different projects. So that is one example of permaculture, and that is led by Costa Ricans.
Yeah, there's a ton of Costa Rican projects. Not all of them use the language of permaculture. I think it hits a little bit more in the agroecology, organic agriculture realm. But for example, like we have a big referral sheet where we'll send, like when we're too full for clients or it's not our zone that we work in, it's too far away. The referral sheet we send is, I think it's probably like 80% Costa Ricans that are doing consulting work or garden design, landscape design, etc.
Amazing. I see another question here. Annika, where are you looking, or where are you from? Or maybe you can answer that. We're almost nearing the end of the hour. Denmark. Okay. Yeah, I would get on Google. I'm not sure exactly what permaculture projects are over there, but just Googling and asking around, and then getting involved in seed exchanges, going to your farmer's market and finding out. Even when you start to get to know one farmer, actually asking them to come over and visit. I find that visiting farmers is nice, because then you can see their organic practices or not, because sometimes people classify themselves as organic, but they're still using agrotoxins. So being really sure that even go to their farm to see this process as recommended. Any last words that you want to say, Scott, of inspiration?
I think one of the pieces I love about permaculture, that as I get deeper into it from like a philosophical perspective, and looking at its what's often called its originating impulse, I love how it gives us permission to start and start small. And you know, you don't have to take a class. You don't need to go to a workshop. You don't need a university degree. You don't need to be a fifth generation farmer. You just have to pick a project and start. And we talk about, you know, take something, do a project that'll take you 10 hours and $100. You know, maybe that's a small worm bin for your kitchen. Maybe that's your garden patio or your patio garden. Maybe that's a couple fruit trees that you're going to take care of. And so like jump into it small and stay focused on that and observe that system. Like watch those worms every day as they break down your coffee grounds, understand like different parts of their body, and get a little lupa, a little magnifying glass, and like really get in there. And I think you'll be amazed at where that can lead you. And so I think this to, you know, if we're going to, you know, change this planet, right, it requires our participation. And it's really easy to get stuck in analysis by paralysis, as we often call it. And so just starting, picking a small project is going to do, I think, wonders. So that's my last, I'll sign off with that.
Great. Yeah, just small. Imagine if all of us collectively started through action. I mean, we hear so much talk about sustainability and regeneration, but it starts with us, and it starts with small action steps in our own household, making changes of potentially going zero waste, refusing shopping at supermarkets, going to your local market, starting to grow just a few different herbs that can really impact your life, such as aloe vera or sage or tomatoes, or just start small and then work your way from there, and then getting involved with other regenerative people in the community and getting inspiration from each other, and knowing that we're all in this together. We're all agents of change, and may this spark the seed of inspiration within all of us to really just get out there and do it. And together we're strong. So with that, thanks so much, Scott, for being on this webinar today and sharing some of your knowledge with us. And
yeah, thank you.